No, I think. Well, so I have the august honor of introducing myself. So this is lovely. So yeah, thank you very much. So thank you all for coming. My name is Tom Garza. I'm the director of the Texas Language Center. I'm starting to be able to say that with relative ease these days. I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies, and I've been involved in I worked at the Foreign Service Institute back in the late 1980s, and so I've had a fairly personal relationship with the proficiency guidelines for about the last 30 years. I'm very interested in exchanging some opinions with you all this noon time that we're together here, precisely on revisiting the proficiency guidelines, which I know many people criticize now as being dated, not really encompassing enough pragmatic features of the language. The oral proficiency interviews are very difficult, expensive to conduct, time-consuming, and so forth. I want to try to address some of those criticisms and look at some ways that we might be able, now using some new FSI materials, some of which you have in your hands, but I want to go over them with you toward the end of my short talk today, to really refocus not so much how we assess at the end, but how we do ongoing assessment of our students. This is all part and parcel, by the way, of us trying as hard as we can. I know we're all in the business together here of trying to function in a competent, hardcore language program with shrinking resources, especially money. I was trying to be gentle about saying resources, being in a larger sense, being those that include human resources, space resources, but really it comes down to our cash flow. So trying more and more to introduce more intensive language courses with slightly increased hours, but much more focused work on proficiency-based instruction, speaking, listening, reading, writing, but very intensively during class, can be helped by this kind, in my view, can be helped by this kind of ongoing assessment. So I want to do a quick down and dirty history of the proficiency movement, and I'm actually not doing this so much for your edification as much as I need to remind you, you may not remember where the proficiency guidelines originally came from, almost now 50 years ago, originally coming from the State Department, but because the State Department is now running the vanguard of putting forward some of the most new, cutting-edge innovations of what the language proficiency guidelines have to offer us. So let me just kind of run through this with you, and then I really want to open it up for some vigorous conversation with you all. So at the beginning, very quickly, I just want to remind you that actually it was the Interagency Language Roundtable, ILR, a branch of the United States Department of State, that because of our incredible inability to deal with the language situation, especially Japanese in World War II, and our continuing difficulty in dealing with the language situation during the Korean War, decided that we really needed to make a much more concerted effort as a nation to look at our abilities in using the term they created, not created it, simply adopted, proficient at speaking, listening, reading, and writing foreign languages, and began with the imperative of World War II and the Korean Wars to create the Civil Service Commission, which was ordered by the State Department to create an inventory of language abilities of their employees. Now think about what this means. Think about it, we did this in our departments. To go to each individual language student we have and ask them, so what can you do? Could you, for example, interpret for a visiting dignitary, and at what level? Right? Now start thinking about this in terms of our students, really, of assessing, so where are they? You'll see where I'm starting with this because I'm going to finish with this. This notion of what can you do? What can one do with the language? This was the root, back in 1951, of the proficiency guidelines, which we now all know and love. At that time, 51, with no measure of proficiency anywhere that existed, not in the European community, not in the United States, we really had no way of assessing where a person's ability was in the foreign language. All we could assess, and it's not really assessing it, all we could state was the number of years the language had been studied. And that doesn't say anything about one's ability. As we all know, some individual students can study 2 years and be quite proficient. Some students need 5, 6 years before they reach any level of functional proficiency. So we were looking for that, and I'm going to use the term that now is widely accepted, a common yardstick for measuring language proficiency. Finally, in 1959, the Foreign Service Institute, FSI, was charged with the development of the first foreign language descriptors, describing incrementally, I should go this way, incrementally, one's knowledge from no functional ability in the language all the way up to a fully educated native speaker of the language. That's quite a task. And indeed, in doing so, the task of doing that took them approximately 5 years. By 1960, we had our first full set of descriptors, and after 1960, the creation of the 6-point, what we now call the ILR scale, from 0 to 5. 0 being no functional proficiency whatsoever, 5 being fully educated native speaker in that level, and to have descriptors that said, what could someone do in the 4 skills of the language with at each of those levels. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what can you do? What can you do in speaking, in reading, in writing, and so forth? So we developed now at the FSI this new interview technique, which some of you now know dearly, either from the giving end or the receiving end, some of us from both ends of that, of the oral proficiency interview. How do we get at where a student falls on that scale of 0 to 5? Well, we have to talk to that student at length. Usually an oral proficiency interview for an average proficient student will last somewhere between 25 and 35 minutes to get enough language sample to be able to make a reasonable and accurate judgment of that student's ability. That takes a lot of time. It also takes a trained individual who knows how to conduct the OPI. So you can already see some of the disadvantages growing up here. What was great about it was there was a standardized scoring process here. Inter-rater reliability on the OPI, by the way, now we're in our 40th year of inter-rater testing of the OPI in the State Department, has an 0.2 level of reliability, an extremely high level of standardized deviation for its reliability. It's very, very reliable. Two trained examiners would usually come within 1 point in terms of number of, getting out on a scale of 100 points, will come within 1 point of proficiency. The later scoring process was broken later into skills, so that there was a set of scores 0 to 5 for reading, speaking, listening, and writing. In 1985, the whole system was changed slightly to include pluses. So we actually had 0, 0 plus, 1, 1 plus, 2, 2 plus, and so on, to give it a little bit more refinement. It was one of the main criticisms of it was that it wasn't as refined as it could be. By the mid-'80s, around the same time, the early '80s I should say, the Academy realized that we were in the same position. After all, we were doing the training for many of the students who were winding up in foreign service, and so we probably should have a similar set of descriptors. And so the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFL, took on the task of creating similar proficiency guidelines for the use in the Academy. And in 1982 released the provisional guidelines. I mentioned that group of guidelines only separately. They were only out for 2 years, from 82 to 84, only because it's an interesting prototype of what is in use today. And what's specifically interesting about them was they were 5 skill. They included speaking, listening, reading, writing, and cultural proficiency. The last group, culture, was ultimately dropped in the 1986 revised 4 skill guidelines because of it being too difficult to implement among various cultural groups. That once we began to try to apply the culture guidelines to, say, a Middle Eastern culture versus an Asian culture versus a Slavic culture and so forth, we found the guidelines to be unmanageable. So ultimately, that point has been revisited, by the way, so I may come back to that toward the end. The guidelines have been revised and are in the process of being continuously revised. Speaking and reading have been revised, writing in 1999 and speaking in 2001, so the guidelines are indeed still to present day being updated. You probably all are familiar with the infamous or now famous ACTFL pyramid of proficiency. I like this model, and even though I know it's now 40 years old, practically almost 40 years old, it's an extremely nice mnemonic, and I actually use it with my students. I actually show my students what language acquisition is all about, because so many come in with the understanding, like any other knowledge, it's often viewed as linear, that you simply have first-year biology, second-year biology, third-year biology, and each year you know more stuff. Well, unfortunately, in our languages, as we know, that's not guaranteed. And instead, what we do deal with is this inverted cone, this pyramid, this ice cream cone, that we fill up from the bottom up. So that indeed the increment of novice is a tiny little amount of language ability, actually, but yet completely functional. You can do stuff with a novice knowledge of a language. Intermediate now has just incrementally a huge amount more of language material in it. Advanced, as we'd say in Russian, tем even more so. And superior, I mean, look at that. And that's actually good to let our students know. Look what it takes to be a native speaker. Think of your own knowledge of English or whatever your native language is. What it takes to be a fully educated native speaker. It's a huge amount of grammatical, lexical, paralinguistic, cultural information. Massive. And that is ultimately our goal, of course, but to work our way up that pyramid is the process that we're all engaged in as we learn a language. More specifically, the pyramid also came with its own descriptors, and these are very, very short descriptors. So these are pages long that Actual came up with for each level. But basically, that novice has no functional ability, speech is limited to memorized phrases. Intermediate can create language and ask and answer simple questions on familiar topics, as long as the topic is familiar. Handle simple situational transactions. At the advanced level, this is the target goal that most of us have for our graduate students. It's the target goal the State Department has for trying to get out its diplomatic corps on the old Army, I shouldn't say old, but on the other Army ILR scale. This would be a 2, the equivalent 2, so 0, 1, 2. As you can see, novice, intermediate, advanced, 0, 1, 2. Advanced says can narrate and describe in the past, present, and future using time and aspect, and handle complicated situations and transactions. That's actually quite a lot of language. That's quite a lot of language. This is the classic, you're driving down a suburban road in Moscow and your car breaks down. You need to A, flag down a milliman, B, explain the situation, C, get your car repaired, and D, pay for it. That's a lot of transactional ability, but that's what an advanced speaker should be able to do, should be able to handle. Superior knowledge, what can I say? This really analysis can support opinion, hypothesize, discuss abstract topics. As I say, I always joke with my students, at the point that you can really say, in my case in Russian, what is the meaning of life? Mm-hmm, yeah, right. Talk about what's the meaning of life. What's on the other side of the time-space continuum? Is there extraterrestrial life? Right? These are the kind of hypotheticals that we need to be able to talk about in order to be at the superior level. It's a tough road to hoe. And yet it's a very, very ambitious and wonderful goal to push all of our students toward. These are simply broken down further. I probably threw this in because I just like as I said, I like the cone. This is breaking it down really into the ACTFL went one step further than the FSI scale did by breaking it down actually into each level, low, mid, high, trying to get that nuance that we want. A novice speaker is a novice speaker, sure, but some novice speakers are better than other novice speakers. So how can we rate them? Well, we have novice low, mid, high, intermediate, low, mid, high, and so forth, all the way up to superior. Now, to complicate this story, and this is now where things, I hope, get a little bit more interesting now I've told you what you probably already all know about the background of the proficiency guidelines and the idea of what do we mean when we say proficient, that we're looking at a set of descriptors. And by the way, before I even go to this, when I talk about these descriptors, it's of paramount importance that we all think of them as that, descriptions. It is not a curriculum. It is not a syllabus. We can't actually use the FSI or the ACTFL guidelines to create, as it were, a way to teach. We can't say, well, I'm going to teach from the guidelines. They just describe. That's all they do. And so anyone who tries to tell you, well, I teach from the guidelines, something's not connecting there. What I'm proposing, however, is that we use these guidelines to inform what we do in the class. That we start getting to a point where not only we assess our students, but our students begin to view their own progress through the language as, what can I do with it? What can I do? Every day, every week, they can go back and look and say, what can I do in French, in German, in Russian, in Spanish, in Thai, whichever language we're teaching, okay? So to complicate this whole pyramid, Foreign Service again, we can thank our friends at the Foreign Service Institute, divide up on the basis of English as the native language, the major languages of the world into 4 proficiency groups based on how difficult it is for a native speaker of English to master these languages. So what you see before you is Group 1, which includes languages such as Afrikaans and Danish, Spanish, Italian, Swedish. Group 2, which includes Bulgarian, Dari, Farsi, German, Greek, Hindi, Indonesian. Group 3, where most of our Slavic languages are, Czech, Polish, Russian, as well as Hebrew, Finnish, Aramaic, and a few others. And then, of course, what we love to call the really, really hard languages of Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean for Americans to learn in English. Having said that those are the increasing languages with increasing difficulty, then we break down and ignore so much length of training, because this is for the foreign service, where their training is divided into time periods, but that's based on, that's all you do. 8 hours a day is just study the language. But think now just in terms of the hours that you see in the parentheses next to them. For an average learner, someone with average aptitude for language learning, smart person, competent, not brilliant, but perfectly good, one of what we would call a good student.
Does that mean an average FSI student?
No, this would mean an average, this is in terms of, and I don't like the metric that they use, but it's based on the MLAT, the Modern Language Aptitude Test. This is based on a separate diagnostic that can be given to any member of the public at large to determine aptitude. This is not just among that population. So that's why this is applicable to the academic community as well. So an average learner, to get to a 2 level in a language like Spanish, to get to that level where we say you're ready to go and take a post in a diplomatic corps, for example, would take approximately 480 hours of training. Now that's a full 4-year curriculum and then some. That would be a 4-year curriculum plus a summer study abroad program. Our average number of students who now, if you count up in Russian, for example, as a target language, and you did first year, second year, third year, fourth year, they did all the courses that were required for the major, and I'll even throw in a one summer program, we can usually squeeze in about 375 to 385 hours. Still under 400. If we go to my language, to Russian, in group 3, and I go to that same average speaker and that same 2 to get a student to the advanced level, we've now kicked it up to 720 hours. I don't stand a chance, right? And therein is now the rub. And here's where I now put the challenge out to you all, our language professionals, is so what can we do? We know that the cards are stacked against us. We can't provide that many hours, at least in classroom hours. So what can we start to do to work toward proficiency gains in a limited number of hours with limited, again, resources that we have available to us, fiscally, money resources. So let me suggest something. I throw out one of my favorite texts here just for the fun of it. A little bit of Jay McInerney. I'm dating myself here, bestseller from 84. Bright Lights, Big City. This is the opening paragraph, and I want to show you, this is based on some research done by a wonderful, wonderful scholar, Elizabeth Bernhardt, who runs the Language Center out at UCLA, one of the UC schools, I'm not forgetting which one it is. It'll come to me in a minute, when it's out in California, who talks and writes a great deal about proficient readers, not proficient texts. That one of the big mistakes we've made in all the past years of our language instruction has been really to think about the materials that we use in teaching as being, this is a first-year text, this is a second-year text, this is a third-year text, and grading text. I learned from graded text in Russian. Simplified Russian that no one reads. It's not real Russian, it's fake Russian. It's been done by an American who said, this is all you can handle, don't try to do more. And the proficiency movement says, don't do that. A text is not proficient, a reader is proficient. So if you're a beginner, you deal with the text at a beginning level. If you're intermediate, you deal with it. If you're advanced, you can probably deal with it quite well. So here's my text for you. I don't know how much this is visible back there, so I'll read it at you briefly, quickly. You're not the kind of guy who'd be in a place like this at this time of the morning, but here you are, and you can't say that the train is entirely unfamiliar, though the details are fuzzy. You're at a nightclub, talking to a girl with a shaved head. The club is either Heartbreak or the Lizard Lounge. All might come clear if you could just slip into the bathroom and do a little more Bolivian marching powder. Then again, it might not. Somewhere back there, you could have cut your losses, but you rode past that moment on a comet trail of white powder, and now you're trying to hang on to the rush. Your brain at this moment is composed of brigades of tiny Bolivian soldiers. They're tired and muddy from their long march through the night. There are holes in their boots, and they're hungry. They need to be fed. They need the Bolivian marching powder. Okay, So I give this text back in the 80s, when it was those heady, happy days in the 80s, to a bunch of students in Moscow who were very, very good students of English, had started studying English in second grade and were now in their 10th grade of study, so they were good. They understood every word. Lexically, this is not an overly difficult text, right? If we look at this in terms of grading it, there aren't a lot of hard words. Here are a few things need some glossing, but not much. And so then the questions start coming out. So I'm going to throw it back to you now as a fully informed native group of English speakers here. I can ask you questions that are not overt from this text, but you know the answer. I can ask you, for example, is our narrator male or female? And you would say? Yeah. Absolutely. What age is he?
Mid-20s.
Mid-20s. You can even not even just say young, you know mid-20s. And I'd say, yep. Yep. Is this an urban or a rural setting? Are we in Kansas? No. This is an urban text, right? This is an urban text. So again, now the fun one, right? So what's our Bolivian marching powder? What's our Bolivian marching powder? Sure, it's Coke. It's Coke, absolutely. And again, the 1984 marker gives us even more divinity that it's definitely cocaine and so forth here. Where are we when this text is being told? What's our locale? Literally, where are we standing?
In a nightclub.
In a nightclub. Is it a fancy, expensive nightclub? No. And how do we know that? Because it's either the Heartbreak or the Lizard Lounge, and those are. And you go to the bathroom. Hey, there are some very nice clubs, at least in '84. There are some lovely clubs that you could go to and do coke in the bathroom. So I heard. So I heard. But honestly, why do we know? Where did we learn that Lizard Lounge and the Heartbreak are sleazy? Where did we learn that? Actually, yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, we may not be able to pinpoint it, but the fact is, that's part of the baggage that now comes with. I mean, the questions I gave you quickly move from intermediate to superior. Basically, I'm counting on you knowing the cultural baggage that's involved in reading a text. Proficient readers, not proficient text. The text. So, what would I do with you as a novice? You literally only have a few memorized phrases of English. What can I do with this? What would you do with a text like this?
You work with the difficult grammar, like negatives, and you cannot say it's entirely unfamiliar. And
nice.
Although the details are funny and the clauses, and it's just.
You're right. You're actually kicking it upside. I'd say you're already novice plus to intermediate low. You're already moving this up. But yes, you start pulling out, well, what's here that's useful? I mean, I would start with a novice group. I mean, you could start with real simple. You are, you are, you are. You, your. Pronoun possessive. Real simple grammar that's based on almost cognates. If I were teaching a group of Russians, for example, I'd be looking at find the cognates. Klub, club, right? We see what's here that's going to be exactly the same. Pudr, powder. They don't know the word powder, but I promise you from Russian they'll figure it out if they just say, I'll say it out loud, say it, right? And so you start pulling out what little bits and pieces. You use cognates, we use familiar phrases, we use exactly very basic grammar and build from there. We're at the intermediate high level. What would you do with it? I asked you a couple of questions already at that level.
Ask them to pick out a metaphor.
Exactly. You'd say, pick out, again, asking questions even like, so I'm going to tell you that this text is about cocaine. Where is cocaine? Where do you see cocaine in this text? It's not here lexically, it's here semantically. That's a good intermediate exercise. Advanced and superior, you've already heard, when we start saying things like, so, what kind of a club is it? So, and this is now asking for hypothesis and supposition. I would suppose that the Heartbreak and Lizard were not very nice clubs, based on the fact that you could do cocaine in the bathroom. Right, I mean, that's it. So any text, this is how we take a fairly straightforward, although as I said, culturally rich text. By the way, I gave this as I was picking text that I was going to be doing proficiency-based instruction in Moscow back in the happy 80s, still at the twilight years of the Soviet Union. I gave a bunch of these to my mother, who is a superior speaker of no language. She's a native speaker of Spanish, speaks English, perfectly well, but she's not a 5 because she's not educated in either language. And I gave her these texts to look at, she reads a great deal actually, and said, well, tell me what you think. And I asked her the same questions I was asking you just now. And it was astonishing. She had no idea this was about cocaine use at all. She read through the text, had no, I mean, so, what is it? So I said, she asked, so what is this Bolivian marching powder? What is that, flour? What is it? I said, no, Mom, there's no flour, no wheat in Bolivia, no. So what? I said, Mom, it's drugs, it's cocaine, heroin. No. No. So what is it about the text? Nothing. What is it about the reader? Everything. Everything. So in proficiency-based instruction, we want to put that focus on the student, on the learner. Proficient learners, not proficient classes. It's not about us, guys. So now finally to the handout here. What's next? What's lovingly been called in the profession can-do assessment. This is formative assessment. Now we go to the ed school terms. Rather than do end of the year, end of course, end of unit assessment, where we say, do you know the past tense? Do you know the instrumental case? Do you know? Rather than do that, we start really focusing on what can you do from the very beginning, from the very first days of the language. What can you do with this language? Now, who is the best person to decide what can you do? Now, we can do this in OPIs. It's very expensive. It's very time-consuming. We can't do it. We know that. We don't have the time. We don't have the money. We don't have the resources to do proficiency-based assessment to, especially representative Spanish in here. Anyone? No Spanish in. How are we at the University of freaking Texas and there's not a Spanish speaker in the room here? Goodness, okay.
Spanish speakers.
Oh, I should say Spanish speaker. Yes, I was going to say.
Spanish department.
Spanish
right?
department.
Yeah.
Spanish department. No, Spanish department is what I was looking for here to say. How do we do 6,000 students of Spanish every year? 6,000 students of Spanish. Right. Russian, not such a big deal. Right. We're talking about a couple of hundred. We could probably do it. But we can start talking about French, German, Italian, even. We got some numbers. Okay. Having said that, who's in the best position to assess? The student, the learner. Now, this is flying in the face of what we've often said, that students are usually the worst critics of their own language. They're usually fairly able to say, I'm fluent in Russian. I've had 2 years. Right? So the same student who says I'm fluent, however, when faced with the can-do list, is somewhat humbled. Because the can-do list is very, very specific. Okay? Now what you have in front of you, I hope, or you can share if you don't, I hope, are I brought a couple of samples here. And now we're back to the ILR, the Interagency Language Roundtable, in attempting to try to make proficient learners the focus of their instruction, rather than say, we all need simply to do OPIs at the end of instruction. From the beginning of instruction, give their students, and you can get all these online, by the way. This doesn't have the click on it, and I somehow erased the click. Oh well. It's not a big deal. You can go to the website. I think it may even be on one of the pages. If you look, simply Google ILR, this will be the first site that will come up for the roundtable, and it has all the descriptors now. And what it's trying to say is, look, the descriptors are only good to the extent that we have good testers. And good testers take it's money and a lot of time to train, and we can't ask all of us here cannot all be certified testers. So we get these kind of lists now, and these are developed by the FSI. They're in 3 skills. We have speaking, reading, and listening. They're working on a set of writing descriptors as well. But those 3 are ready. If you're interested in the others, by the way, I'll put them out by the table here, and you can take them as well. But this is what a can-do list looks like. Take a look at this. Take a look. I can tell or ask someone how to get from here to a nearby hotel, restaurant, or post office. Very concrete. It has to be concrete, so you think about it. Really, can you do that? And the student, hopefully, and we try to guide our students, how do you use a can-do list? Say, okay, to yourself, now do it. Say it in the foreign language and to yourself, right? So if you say, ask or tell someone how to get so. And it has to go through your head, right? And you go through all of this. Can you really do it or not? And you check off yes or no. I mean, this is real simple. You either can or you can't, right? And you move on, right? I can order a simple meal. Sure, I can. Well, do it. So in your head, you say, я бы хотел пиццу, пиво, на десерт, фрукты. Okay, you've done it. You ordered a meal. Simple, but it's a meal. Not a great one, but it'll do. Check it off, you can do that. And move on, okay? And you see how this works. And the idea is that students very early on become aware that the language is an empowering tool to do stuff. It's not simply, I need to know the progressive tense. I simply need to know the aspect, the imperfective aspect of these verbs. I need to know the genitive case of, that these now become the tools that make the language work to this end. The goal is being able to do something. To be able to do it, you need to know the grammar. You need to know the lexicon. You need to know how to use it. So it becomes much more instrumental, I think. It becomes much more instrumental to our students when you give them these lists to say, look, if you can't order from a menu, why not? What's wrong with that? Well, you need to be able to say, you need to know the accusative case in Russian. In Russian, you need to know the accusative case. If you don't know that case, you can't order. So now they need to know the accusative case if they want to check that off, right? You see where I'm going with all this? Okay. You can take a look also, I brought in just for fun, the National Language Service Corps. This is a new group out of Washington that's a service organization of volunteers from across the United States in 55 languages who are there, who volunteer their service to help out in the case of things like Katrina, national disasters, areas of national need, blood drives, fires, all kinds of things that happen, where languages may not always be spoken in the region, and specialists in those languages need to be called out to help. And in order to be certified to do this, they send you this can-do. And I again gave you just the, this is all sections. There's a section on listening, there's one on speaking, there's reading and writing. And you can see again, it's very, very detailed. And actually, play with this one at home, because this one's quite complete. This one will really take you from 0 to 5. If you can get through this list, and really answer honestly, but if you can get through it, you'll be able to tell what level you are in English, or in any language, because you can actually simply translate it into whatever language you're studying. So those are the two, that's where we're moving in these days, is toward the idea of a proficient student. Now, for UT, where do I think this has some relevance? These intensive classes that we've been talking about, to me, will only succeed, and I say this with all due modesty and respect, because I'm going to try one of these out myself in the fall. Never done this before, not sure if it's going to work, hoping it does. The 6-6, 2 6-hour intensive courses covering first year and second year Russian in 1 year, to try to see if by putting the emphasis on the student to be able to do a can-do list doesn't help, I don't want to say to motivate them, but to push them in the direction of really, really focusing on what they have to learn, what they need to learn to be able to fulfill those criteria. And I want to use the kind of can-do list again to move the syllabus forward, because we are going to be covering a lot of material in a very short period of time, but more importantly than that, the student needs to want to cover that material. The student needs to see the relevance. Why are we learning the instrumental case? Because you can't do, and we give the certain tasks that require it. Without the instrumental, you can't do this. You can't say what I'm studying. You can't say what I'm engaged in doing unless you know the instrumental. Why do I need to learn the data? Because you can't say how old you are. Don't you want to be able to say that? Right? You need the dative case. Right? You can't give something to someone. How depressing is that? Right? Without the dative case. So there are now reasons, in a sense, to want the grammar rather than it simply be textbook fodder. So, from that, I move us now into the area of saying, so I put this out at you as a plan for the future. Any questions, comments about where this is? And of course, I've used all of this, by the way, without kind of embarrassing self-promotion here. I wanted to use the opportunity to talk to a captive audience briefly about proficiency to kick off tomorrow's day-long workshop. The Foreign Service Institute specialist, very impressive, new, young, exciting specialist from the FSI. This is not my generation's Foreign Service. This is your generation's Foreign Service, coming in now to talk to us about where proficiency is in 2010. The morning session, this will be down in the Eastwoods room, starting at 10:30, will be all a group of 5 short talks, and then an afternoon workshop session, which will be held in, remind me, Amy?
Sinclair
Suite on the 3rd floor, I believe. the floor below us, the Sinclair suite, which is how to do what I was kind of talking about, how to do formative assessment in your classroom, how to prepare materials that are based on the guidelines to help develop proficiency in the classroom and so forth. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to use this to kick off the topic of proficiency for tomorrow's workshop. So questions, please. I'm dying to hear what you think of all this stuff. And you've got the documents there to play with and question and whatever. Please, go ahead, Kathy.
Well, Dr. Gaza, thank you very much for your talk.
Not
And
at all.
the question that I had the honor of presenting your paper about use of Twitter in the class.
Sure.
So, but that paper, and it's basically Dr. Gaza delivered a really fantastic paper in Russia about the use of Twitter in the classroom. But that paper, I think, was geared towards the, it didn't address the language class per se, right?
Right.
So I was wondering what would you say about implementing the same technologies in actually language classes like Twitter, blogging?
Absolutely. And no, we're going to rely on it. We're going to rely on technology, especially for the at-home portion of the class. We have to. Twitter is only, it's my problem as a Russianist, because they're only, not until 2011, and I'm going to say that hopefully, by 2011 we're supposed to have 4 new scripts in Twitter. There's supposed to be one for Arabic, one for Cyrillic, oh gosh, I'm now forgetting. There's one Asian language, I think it's Korean or Japanese, and Chinese are supposed to be ready by 2011. Several, yeah, please, go.
Sorry, when you say having access to the scripts on Twitter, because I know that being on Twitter, I have read Arabic on Twitter.
Exactly, and what the deal is that this would become an Arabic-based Twitter site. The way that we now have Amazon.ru or Amazon.co.uk. That is, it's not simply Amazon.com in Russian, it's residing in Russia. And so Twitter, you're absolutely right, you can play with it now, and we can do this in Russian, is you can put Cyrillic onto your Twitter site. But it's still a closed site for you, as opposed to Twittering with people over there in Cyrillic. Right, and that's what we're trying to get to. But we're almost there. We're almost there, and as I said, right now, by all means, Facebook, get our students, students are spending between 15 and 25 hours a week. 15 and 25 hours a week is the national average. I think UT is probably somewhere close to 40 or 50 on Facebook or other social networking sites. Steal some of that time from them. Steal 3-4 hours and make them do Facebook, but in Russian. Have them do Odnoklassniki, have them do Kontakte. Have them get, and you do this in terms of the proficiency guidelines again. So what kind of things can you do at an intermediate or beginning level? Give your biographical information, right? Name, where you're from, and so forth. Send that out there. Put it out there and start talking to someone who's out there. Don't find yourself a bride or a groom. This can get silly, but you know what I mean about use the site thoughtfully in your classroom. There's just tons of the websites that our students are on now here that they use daily, everything from Amazon to buy a textbook, things like eBay to buy whatever, that they can use in the language to do the same thing. In my class, I plan to require them, for example, to get on one of in first semester, by the end of first semester, to get on one of the Russian bookseller sites, which I'll give them the URLs for, to find and purchase a book of interest to them, do the transaction, produce the textbook, which shows me they've done it, and in second semester, that's going to become their free reading book. They're going to have chosen it. That's going to be the book that they're going to read in Russian through the course of the semester.
But they don't know what they're buying, right?
It's probably Twilight in Russian is what we're going to want to do. Like 26 students with Twilight in Russian, yes. But, yes, please.
Professor Garza, when you were in Russia, did you ever look at and did you even have access to call people from the Russian Foreign Service? How are they training their diplomats, and what format do they use compared to this format?
It's a wonderful question. It's changed tremendously since the 1980s. I was able to get into MGIMO back then because of where I was doing my own graduate work, which was at what at that time was called the Maurice Torres Institute of Foreign Languages, right across the street from MGIMO. MGIMO was simply in the Soviet tradition of you simply, if you were choosing to become a diplomat, you learned what you were told to learn. And that was it. I mean, the pedagogy was do it. Right now, where it actually has softened quite a bit, the pedagogy has moved very, very heavily into web-based technology. A lot of time is spent online looking at domestic websites. So I visited what would be the equivalent for us of 10th year English. I know it kind of creeps me out to even think about, 10th year English, but that's where these individuals are. 10th year English, American variant. And they're on all over websites. I mean, things like Home Depot, and there are assignments like, you know, you need to find, they'll give a list of, you need to find the following items. A rake, you know, a tractor, there's a Mercedes-Benz, there's this incredible list, and then they have to go to these various websites to say where it would be that they find it. So they use Google, they go to the sites, they find out where they are, and they have to report back where they found it. So yeah, a lot of online work is done. A lot of it now, yeah. And I think that's the quotient that we can build into our intensive classes that will help make up. Now I go back to that chart that had all those incredible hours on it. How do we get close to that 420 or those 720 hours? Well, and the students don't like to hear it this way. We don't say, we're going to give you lots and lots of homework, but rather to say, we're going to give you lots of possibilities to do tasks at home that will get you to reach those levels of proficiency. You want to become, you don't want to be a 0 anymore, you want to become a 1, here's what you got to do, right? You need to be able to do the following. In order to do the following, go home and start practicing. Start practicing. And again, you know, a lot of this is going to, I go back to my mentor, Wilbur Rivers, from the old days, who said, we cannot motivate from without. Students must be motivated from within. We can't say, be motivated. You know, Russian is a cool language, do it. Won't work. But we can say, we can get them to the point where they start saying, I really want to do this. I want my Russian to get really good. I want my Arabic to get really good. I want my Japanese to get really good, right? Get our students to say that. And that's what we're shooting for. We have to get them to motivate from within. Yeah.
Are you the only one right now reverse engineering these classes? And is that, like taking? I mean, how widespread is this idea of taking these tests and saying, well, this is the idea, this is what you want to do, and you've got to think you need the instrumental case for this, you need the accusative case for this. All right, now we're going to teach this.
Right.
I mean,
it's actually becoming more commonly taught than I think it is, even in my own worldview. Foreign Service obviously has figured it out, and this is how they're teaching their own students in the State Department and in DLI, Defense Language Institute, and other of the 3 letters in the government service, CIA, FBI, are all doing the same thing now. Is the so-called motivational way of teaching, right? Student-centered. It's all on you, right? It's on you. We'll see how it goes. I think in the university, because this does require, from our side, we have to do a lot of work to do this. For all that we say it's student-centered, we have to produce a lot of stuff to give them to do. So it's a lot of work on our part, and that's why I don't think it's that popular yet, because it does require us to produce a lot. You have to come up with the website, you have to come up with the tasks, and so, yeah, please.
Just, I've been speaking to students that are going to Germany to study.
Yeah.
And I look back how I learned German, and now what they have access to, there's absolutely no excuse that any student of any other language should not be listening to the radio.
Yes, yes,
Through the internet.
yes.
And even if you don't understand it, you
Yeah.
can still put it on for an hour a day
Yeah.
and try to pick out what you can get.
My students still find it laughable that I tell them, I mean, I'm 51 now, and in my college days, to get a copy of Pravda was a big deal.
Yeah.
It was a big deal to have the copy, the single copy of the newspaper that we passed around, one copy for the entire semester for the entire class. So that was a big deal. To hear Russian radio, unheard of, just unheard of, unless you could get into the State Department, get on one of their special shortwave radios, and maybe you could catch a Russian language Voice of America broadcast.
Yeah.
Big deal. I mean, when you say now, look what you can do. You can get on the KGB website. It's so cool. You can do such neat things with Russian, with Arabic, with German, with Spanish. I mean, there's so much out there that you have immediate access to. Any newspaper, any book, anything you want. And indeed, this is where I say to students now, so what's your interest? I mean, what do you want to read as your home reading for spring semester? You tell me now and you get that book. You tell me you really do want to read Twilight in Russian, go for it. You know, you can find it. I promise you. So they're going to have to find it. Find that copy of Twilight in Russian, order it, pay for it, get it to the US, and that becomes your home reading for the spring semester, right? But every step of the way is going to be using the language, right? So that every time we say to them, you've got to do, you know, this assignment. It's not simply, okay, open the book, take the following words, put them in the plural, right? It's not going to be just that anymore. We need to get them actually to do stuff. They've got to do stuff with it. Yes, please.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and play devil's advocate.
Play devil's advocate, please, please, that's what I'm here for.
Okay, so I see two vested interest groups. So
Yes.
we have folks maybe who are teaching languages like Aramaic, classical Chinese,
Yes.
where you can't, these are not classic
Yes, yes,
and the literature folks.
yes.
What are your suggestions in terms of sort of finding common ground and assessing students' needs?
Completely manageable.
Okay.
Let me start the first group when we do Latin classics,
Right.
and I include Old Church Slavic. There are a bunch of our languages.
Yeah.
This isn't quite right for them. And mind you, there are proficiency guidelines for both Latin and Greek. They do exist for reading, writing. They do exist. Having said that, they're in the minority of this, right? For those languages, we do simply have to look at a very different kind of can-do list. It's all going to be focused on translation. It's going to be focused on reading ability. To some degree, I mean, my wife, I tease her mercilessly because they actually did apparently in Berkeley, they actively wrote out essays in dead languages, and I'm like, why? but they did. so I guess one could do a can-do list. Can you write a letter home in Latin? Sure. Salve, okay. Sure. I remember we were given this little book in high school. I took Latin, and it was called Quomodo Dicatur, and it really was called Conversational Latin for Students. And it was a bunch of phrases like, let's go to the ball game, and stuff like that in Latin. I don't know. But okay, having put that aside, because you're right, that's a rarefied group that where we don't look at proficiency guidelines as much, because we're not talking about that kind of proficiency. Proficiency is in translation and reading mostly. But now we move into the literary folk, and that is still a quotient of our students. I'm not about to poo-poo them. I want to say that has its own, falls right into the can-do. So let's say, for example, because I always want to say, your question, the can-do says, you can change a tire in Russian. I don't want to change a tire in Russian. I hope I never have to change a tire in Russian, right? And you can just scratch that. That's not on my list. That's not on my bucket list. Okay? However, where it says, I can read War and Peace in the original, that's a can-do. And that is where we can start, and then of course we want to pull it back and say, I can read short poetry. I can understand the opening paragraph. I can understand, and we build. I can read a magazine. I can read a newspaper, front page. I can read the headline. Right? We move our student toward that kind of reading can-do, absolutely. I do not want to discourage the hardcore lit person, because that's still a quotient of our best students. Indeed, I would suggest that some of our best students in area studies and all start out as lit students, and a little bit vice versa, but mostly that the first way. I certainly did. I mean, I was a hardcore lit person. That's, that was all about the literature, but then, things happened. But to me, the most important thing was I wanted to read Dostoevsky in the original. That's what it was all about. And so I was determined, I wanted to get to the point that I could read No Some Underground in the original language. So can-do simply, it's just a different can-do list. But no, we cater to those students. We love those students. Students who come in, by the way, with the literary bent, who say, I love Tolstoy, I love Karamzin, or whatever, tend to be some of our hardest, can you say hardcorest students. They're the most resolute about learning it. They really, because they have such instrumental motivation. And it's very conscripted. It's the book they're after if they want to get to the book. And for them, being able to order a pair of tickets on the street is not that important. It just isn't. So we just simply cater to them over here. And that's fine. That's fine.
Can you teach both the people and people who want to order tickets on the street in the same class?
This is the joy, and it should have its own slide probably. This is the joy to me of student-centered instruction. Absolutely. The same way that I'm going to have students reading, so far I've got 9 in this class, we'll hope it gets up to 20. Let's say I have 20 students in my 6-6 class. I probably will have 20 different books going on at the same time. Right? And the same way that I can attend to the same goal of task of comprehension, I don't care what text you're reading. I'm not interested anymore, and this is where we are a little bit different. I no longer need to test on, so what happened what happened to Vronsky in chapter 5? Does he live, does he not? I'm not interested in the details so much now of the individual text. I'm interested in getting each student through his, her own text. So you can have very radical differences. And one of the tasks that we do, or that's planned on my syllabus for second semester, for example, is pick your hobby, pick whatever it is that you're out to do. I always point to anything else for someone to throw gardening out here. Your hobby's gardening, so there you go. In that semester, your task is to say, you're gardening, okay, you need to find 3 sites where you can order seeds, equipment, and get advice. 3 different sites. You show me what those sites are. Now, set task 1. Task 2, come up with 3 problems that you have in your garden. Worms, black rot, and drought. I don't know, right? And now find solutions to those 3 problems on the net. Next thing, and so it goes. Each time building the task a bit, the can-do list gets bigger. But each one of you is going to be doing what you're interested in. You're interested in punk music. You're interested in cooking. You're interested in engineering, whatever. And each person goes off. And again, that's why I say for us, the teacher, it's a little bit rugged. It's a little bit tough. But if we're trying to do this, we're trying to do this. Yeah. What else?
So these people who are doing all these tasks, they're just working by themselves on their own with the dictionary, looking at various advice at home, and are you involved in supervising, and how are you supervising that?
The way the plan is, and we'll see if it works, the plan is there are 2 blogs that are set up. One is set up that's purely about material that every student is working on, and one is set up for individual work. And that I and hopefully at least one TA have to attend to throughout the course. That's going to be my homework. Homework will not be graded the same way that we grade now, so that's going to give me a little bit of time. It won't be the turn in the task and I check everything off. Instead, it's going to be can-do lists. Did you do this? Did you do this? Show me that you've ordered the book. Show me a receipt. Show me a website, that kind of thing. Show me a product. Assessment will be much more portfolio-based rather than simple assessment. And so, sure, there are going to be 2 ways that I'm going to be looking at what you guys are doing out in class, or I'm sorry, outside of class. I'm going to be looking at on the computer as well. That's going to be my homework. Yeah. Yeah, again.
Explain the 6-6 program
Yeah,
again.
6-6 was a proposal put out in consultation with the Language Policy Advisory Committee to take our current what we have is a 5-hour, 2-semester sequence for first year, 10 hours total, and try to make it an intensive 6-hour model, 6 hours of instruction with a lot of outside work in 1 semester for first year, and do the same for second year. Basically taking, and indeed, if we look at it in those hours again, taking what in Russian would have been 18 hours of instruction down to 12 hours of instruction. And the big question that's being begged here, the elephant on the table, is can we do what 18 hours did in 12? And I'm willing to bet, and I will come before you a year from now and go, either hooray or ah. I'm betting that we can actually do a better job in terms of proficiency. And I have to be always careful to say, I bet my students will be able to do can-do at least as well in 12 hours. Yeah, that's my hope. Don't be nasty.
My brother is a junior, and he doesn't know a word in Russian beyond Здравствуйте.
Which is a good word to know.
But he looked at this, the 6-hour, and what can I do at the end of this? What does that mean to be, if it's 2 years in one year? What am I going to be able to do after this?
Well, the can-do, we know already that what I was shooting for is a 1 at the end of the 2 courses, which is the same as the end of 2 years. Our students routinely will test out at a 1+. Our best students who spend time abroad will test out at a 2 at the end of these are our majors, which I think for Russian is pretty good. That's pretty damn good to come out with a 1+ or possibly a 2. For a student doing this 1 year, will probably come out at a 1 level. The very, very strong students who are extremely self-motivated could even come out at a 1+. And if I get even 1 student who shows 1+, I'm going to blow the stats out of the water. That I will have achieved in 1 year what we normally achieve at the end of 3. And I'm not betting on this. I'm just saying that that's my personal goal is to come out with 1s and maybe a couple of real gung-ho students who bite off more than they think they can chew and swallow. And we get a 1+ out of there. Yeah. Yes, please.
So in that Proficiency for Dummies cartoon,
Yes.
there's this sentence that says, I can speak English good.
Yeah.
So
I can speak in English good. I purposely chose that because it's not typical, it's not a typical grammatical error for any particular language group.
Yes,
I didn't want to insult any one group.
My question is, with this proficiency approach, as long as they can be understood, we can overlook some of the language element. Is that the idea?
That's a wonderful point. If you follow the guidelines, if we look at the proficiency guidelines, the first 2 levels allow a lot of latitude for accuracy as long as content is delivered. But, and my students will know this from the beginning, in a language especially like Russian, which is grammatically driven, you can't get beyond a 1 level without the grammar. So I'm personally going to push hard that it be accurate as well as communicative. What this means, I can speak in good, is completely understandable to any native speaker of English. But it will never get this student beyond 0+ in English. The student, that is a 0+ utterance, because it's grammatically untenable, it's also ambiguous. And those 2 concerns mean it will never be a 1. So here's again where I'm calling on student focus. If my student doesn't want to come off as illiterate, right? Or at least, as we put up here, ungrammatical. If the student doesn't want to appear to that, then he or she needs to try to hit that 1 mark.
I think that's the challenge. For the
That's a
teacher.
real challenge. That's a real challenge. And again, this goes back to this notion of if you want to be able to say this sentence, you need to know the present indicative. You need to know, I can speak well. So what do we need to teach you? What can I give you to get you to that point? Right? So a lot of this has to do, and that's why this is my only concern about, my worry, I should say, big worry about 6-6 is still the large enrollment. Because it does require a lot of feedback from us, immediate instant feedback. And that's very hard in a class of 25. It's very hard to do. So, I mean, I'm pushing hard to try to keep the number down to under 20, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. But again, we're all feeling our way around here. We don't know how this is going to work. Yeah, excellent question. Excellent. Yeah.
I was just wondering whether your 6-6 course will count as 3 semester hours or will it count as more?
Count to 6.
It's always
It's a 6-hour course. It'll count for 6 credit hours.
So, and all of those 6 credit hours are in class hours? Or
Yes. 6 hours in class, and at least, and I tell the students out front, at least twice that much, at least 12 hours at home, at least. That's minimum. You count on working at home 2 hours a night. You can take the weekend off. but you got to, you really, it's good. I mean, I'm going to give you enough stuff to do on your can-do list to keep you busy for at least 2 hours a night. So yeah, and hopefully it's stuff that they're not going to be upset about doing, because some of it's going to be, instead of going home and getting on damn Facebook, get on Proficiency, get on Contact, get on friends page. Yeah, that's the idea.
I'm just wondering, how will you schedule 6 hours and 5 days?
It's actually strangely easy. And Monday through Friday, my for example, we'll run 11 to 12, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 11 to 12:30 on Tuesday, Thursday. It's real simple. It's real simple. And so you just do 3-hour classes and 2 1.5-hour classes. Real simple. Yeah. And I think all of us who are doing the 6-6 model are going to try that. Yeah. But the worst thing about my class, it's in 2 locations. But a lot of that happens in summer school. We do that all the time.
How many of your colleagues are going to do the same thing from other languages?
That would be none. From other languages. We've got almost all of Middle Eastern is doing it. Middle Eastern has adapted it. French has modified it. They're doing 6-6-6. No, that's Spanish. Spanish is doing 6-6-6 for their first and second year modules, so 18 hours again. French is completely different. I think it's 5-5-6. Something like that. Everyone's got their own model, and so we're all trying them out to see, well, what works best. This is next year is going to be an extremely important year about gathering data for all of us to see what's working and what's not working. So, well, our time is out, guys, and I can't thank you enough spending a Friday with me. Good God, when the weather's almost nice and humid. But thank you for coming into the cool of nothing else for an hour and spending some time. And go forward and teach your languages, knock them down. But thank you.